The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
All right, Senator Mike Lee, along with Senators Ted Cruz and Rand Paul and Marco Rubio, have put together a proposal to defund Obamacare. And there is about 70 members of the House that have signed on to it, a number of members of the Senate. But there is a little bit of a divide amongst Republicans strategically. For example, Karl Rove has said that it is the worst legislation in our lifetime, and he wants to get rid of it. He's not sure strategically, and it was predicated on lies, if that's the right way to do it. So I decided to bring Senator Mike Lee and Karl Rove together so that they can, I'm not even going to say call it a debate, but a discussion about how best to get rid of Obamacare, considering this is more of a strategic disagreement. Is that a fair assessment, guys?
I'd say tactical.
Tactical? Strategic? Tactical? What do you think, Senator Lee?
Fair enough. It's a disagreement about how we get to where we want to be. We don't want Obamacare, and I think the best way, at this point, the only way, the last way before the law kicks in, is to defund it.
All right, and why don't you explain your proposal, and then, Karl, you can weigh in on why you may think this is the best tactical move, okay? Senator Lee?
Sure. So, Sean, what I've been saying is that the American people don't want this law. They know that it's going to make health care unaffordable. They also know that it's unfair the way the president has said he's going to require individuals to comply with the law, but not big businesses. So if the president's not ready and willing and able to implement the law as it was written, the American people shouldn't fund it. And if everyone in Congress who purports to be against Obamacare simply refuses to vote for any spending bill that contains funding for further implementation and enforcement of Obamacare, we can defund it.
All right. Karl, is that...
Well, look, first of all, I want to compliment Senator Lee for having the courage of conviction to stand up and fight. And I think that's what a lot of people want to see right now is fighting. They want us to fight on this issue. I also want to raise a question about Sean Hannity's sensibilities and having two bland guys with Utah connections on at the same time. This is a way to put your radio program listeners to sleep.
Listen, I got to tell you, Karl, this is a driving wedge issue now amongst conservatives and Republicans. So I think it's healthy to have this discussion.
Yeah, first of all, I don't think this is the last alternative. I think we got to be very careful about setting ourselves up so that if this comes up short, that we have admitted that we have no other alternatives to stop it. I disagree with this approach for the following reason. We had a shutdown of the government in 1995, and it was a partial shutdown because we'd funded the military and we'd funded most of the rest of the government, so we didn't have, to shut down all the government. We just had to sort of trim back in certain places, and it hurt the Republicans badly. We lost seats in the House in the next election, and it effectively ended the Gingrich Revolution. This time around, when the government runs out of money on September 30th, it runs out of money for all the discretionary parts of the government. So the military's not going to get paid, FBI agents are not going to get paid, Border Patrol people are not going to get paid. Anything that requires discretionary outlays is not going to get paid. Now, it's one thing to say we're not going to allow for any discretionary spending of the government unless you agree to repeal Obamacare. But what happens when, in the days that follow, we get heart-rending stories about military families not being able to make ends meet, about doctors and nurses and health practitioners at federal government health facilities not being able to be paid? I mean, this is going to be a nightmare for us. So I applaud Senator Lee for fighting. I think we all need to fight, but I think we have better strategies available for us, and we particularly need to be in a position where we're focused more on the opposition than on castigating ourselves, and more, it strikes me, on effectively undermining Obamacare rather than trying to sort of set a standard that says if you don't agree with me, you're not sufficiently conservative.
Senator?
Okay, so this is a false choice that we're talking about here. And a false choice that suggests that somehow we've got to choose between either funding Obamacare on the one hand or causing a government shutdown on the other hand. What I'm saying is let's fund government, but just not Obamacare. The only reason we're in this position to begin with is that Congress has chosen to fund everything at once in one big, huge bucket. Nobody shops like this, and Congress shouldn't spend money like this. What I'm saying is that the House of Representatives should pass a bill, a funding mechanism with the Graves legislation attached to it to claw back and stop funding, both discretionary and mandatory, that deals with further implementation and enforcement of Obamacare. At that point, it would come over to the Senate, and the Democrats in the Senate would then be confronted with a choice. Do they choose to shut down government in order to make sure that they fund Obamacare? Or do they do the right thing and allow government to be funded without Obamacare? That's what we need. And what I'm saying is that it's absolutely essential that we stop funding for Obamacare now. We can do this, and if every Republican in Congress simply refuses to fund it, we will.
Let me jump in and ask a question, Senator Lee, and I know, Karl, you want to respond to that. So you're saying fund everything else in terms of the government, in other words, our debt, our obligations, Social Security, our military, all of our obligations, but Obamacare. Now, you break that up into discretionary and mandatory spending for Obamacare. Isn't there a complication with that?
Well, it's something that we have to do. It's something that we would have to add on. Mandatory spending continues unless you stop it, but you can stop it with language in a continuing resolution.
Right.
And legislation offered by Tom Graves in the House and by Ted Cruz in the Senate, if attached to a CR, could do precisely that. But look, the point here is that this is a law that is very unpopular with the American people, and with good reason. Just 12% of Americans support the individual mandate. Doctors don't want it. Businesses oppose it. Unions say it's bad for workers. Studies show it'll drive up premiums, and it's going to force Americans off their health plans. We are talking here about the American people, and what we've learned is that when we play politics with the American people, everyone loses. So this isn't about what's good politics or bad politics for the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. This is about protecting the American people and their right to continue to have good health care.
Karl, why are you so convinced that what Mike is proposing would end up being a government shutdown?
Well, it counts on the Democrats, when the House sends over such a bill, caving. And what evidence do we have that they'll cave? They've got two very easy solutions. The first solution is simply to say, oh, we'll take that House bill and we'll fund Obamacare under it and we'll send it back to you. So the onus is on you, the House Republicans. It is up to you to, we've got the votes in the Senate. We've got the majority. Bang, it's back to you. And we fund the entire government, including Obamacare. And it's now up to the House to say, we're not going to accept the Senate bill. And who gets blamed? Does anybody think that the Republicans are going to escape being blamed for our troops not being paid, our prison guards not being paid, our Border Patrol not getting paid, essential government services being stopped dead? No, let's not kid ourselves. We'll be blamed. And it's because the Democrats have an easy out, which is to say, oh, wait a minute, we got the votes in the Senate. Here it is. It's back to you. The second thing is that there is a question. I frankly believe that there is the ability to undo Obamacare by 51 votes. But I think you have to undo the entire piece of legislation. That is to say, you have to repeal the legislation. If we simply stop the mandatory spending, I think there is a case that could be made that it could be done with 51, but there's also a case, perhaps even stronger, that it's going to require 67 votes in the Senate, given the Senate's budget rules, in order to do that. And again, we get tied up in a controversy where it looks like the onus is on the Republicans. Now, look, this law is unpopular, and for every good reason. But let's be honest about it. The idea of defunding, cutting off funding as a means to stop it, is not as popular as opposition to Obamacare.
But, Karl, I have a question. Isn't it,
yeah.
I mean, all spending constitutionally begins with the House. That is their constitutional authority and power. So why, and for all the reasons, you said it was one of the worst laws ever passed in a generation, and it's bad law predicated on a mountain of lies. You said that to me on TV.
Yeah.
So why not?
I believe it firmly.
Why not use the constitutional power that the House has and isolate the payment of the rest of the government?
Sean, the bill does have to start in the House. You're right. But the Senate has the ability to amend it, and the Senate Democrats have the votes to amend it, to send it back to say, okay, we now approve spending for Obamacare. We've taken your exact bill, removed the provisions regarding Obamacare, and we're sending it back to you. And the onus then is on the House. And the question is where are the votes to make this pass? We can't do it when we've got 46 Republicans in the Senate, and that depends on the New Jersey senator who's Republican senator who's occupying a seat temporarily left vacant by a Democratic death. Where are the votes to pass it? I just don't see it. And this assumes that the Democrats are going to be scared of a shutdown. They aren't. They want it. They want it. They know what happened to us in 1995 when the government got shut down, and they would love to happen to it again. This is the one strategy the one tactic that might be able to guarantee that the Democrats pick up seats in the Congress in 2014.
Senator?
You mean to suggest that we're not going to fight and that we shouldn't fight simply because we're so afraid of being blamed for it? I mean, this is how we get into this mess. When we say, well, we're afraid that the other side's not going to cave, so we have to. So we cave, and we cave, and we cave, and we get Obamacare, and we get new entitlement programs that never go away. This is how we get into trouble. What we're dealing with here are the lives of individual Americans. 57% of all Americans believe that this law will make their family's health care situation worse, not better. And that statistic is getting worse all the time. And if we're complicit in funding this thing, if we don't do everything we can, even if we think that, there's a risk that the other side's going to try to blame something bad on us, then we're not serving the American people. Look, the fact remains, good politics follow good policy. Good policy here is to fight with everything in us, do everything we possibly can to stop Obamacare funding. And this law that's only getting less popular every single day rather than more popular is not a strong one upon which the Democrats can hang their hat in forcing a government shutdown. I don't want a shutdown. They shouldn't force one over a law that was passed without a single Republican vote, that's now been amended twice by the Supreme Court, 2 more times by the President, and is evolving and becoming less popular every single day. They can't fight on that. They won't win on that, and we should not capitulate.
Now, I want to be clear about this, Senator. I want to make certain I understand this. You're not suggesting I don't want to fight on Obamacare simply because I don't agree with your solution. You're not suggesting that I believe we ought to cave in and give up. I think we have a strategy that is better than the one you're talking about. We ought to be fighting hard to delay all of the implementation of Obamacare for a year. The President said, I'm not ready to put the employer mandate in place. I think we ought to be out there fighting hard to say, Mr. President, if you're not willing to subject businesses to your law, then why should you subject individuals to your law? We ought to be fighting hard on it. We ought to be going to court. I bet you don't think he has the authority to delay the employer mandate for a year. Who's preparing the lawsuit right now to go to court? We ought to be in court the first day that we possibly can to say the President of the United States has no authority to unilaterally suspend a part of a law that he signed into law. Third, we ought to be involved in more oversight, and we ought to be looking for every opportunity to do it. We ought to be standing up on the floor of the Senate where we don't have majority of the committees in order to go after them. In the House, we ought to be having concerted efforts each and every day to say to the American people, we're digging deep to find out what's wrong behind the administration's implementation of the law. And we also ought to be able to lay out our agenda of what we want to do. Instead of Obamacare, we want to allow people to save tax-free for their out-of-pocket medical expenses. We want to allow people their health insurance to take it from job to job. We want small businesses to be able to pool their risk and get the same discounts big companies get. There are a whole bunch of Republican initiatives that we're not talking about. And finally, we have got to avoid saying that this one thing is the one thing that we have to do, otherwise we've lost the fight. Because we need to keep this fight going no matter how successful or unsuccessful we are. We need to keep this fight going every single day we can until we have a President of the United States in office who will sign a complete and total repeal of this law.
Senator?
Look, the best way to delay is to defund. And I agree with you, Karl, that we've got to find a way to delay it. I agree with you that we're not in a position to repeal it right now. But if we want to delay it, the best way to do that is to defund it.
Senator,
we've got to fight on every single front that we have.
Senator,
and we've got bargaining power when it comes to spending. That's what we've got to do is fight there.
Yeah. Senator, if we don't have the votes to repeal it today, we don't have the votes to defund it, and they know it. All the Senate Democrats need to do is to say, we'll take that House bill, remove the Obamacare language, and throw it straight back at us. And where are we? We're at a place where the government is about ready to shut down and where there's a bill out there that people will support. Again, I repeat, the polling data shows that people do not approve of cutting off funding of Obamacare, even if they support repeal of Obamacare. Take the Kaiser Foundation survey. 53% said those opposed to the health care law should continue to try and change or stop it so it has less impact on employers, taxpayers, and health care providers. Only 33% said it's the law of the land, accept it, and stop trying to block its implementation.
Let me just take a quick break right here. Senator, is there any chance, have you spoken with these labor leaders, including Jimmy Hoffa Jr.? Are they going to join you in this effort?
I would invite them to join me. I would love to meet with them, and I'm going to try to set up a meeting to discuss that very thing. Look, this is a very real opportunity for us where we've got many of the law's most ardent supporters, those who were there initially at the outset cheerleading for this thing, who are now saying this thing is going to be bad for the American people. Yeah. And I think they belong naturally with us. I think that we need to defund this because we've got bargaining power when it comes to spending, and we've got to use that bargaining power any time we have the chance. And so, look, I'm looking at the American people. I'm looking at protecting hardworking Americans, men and women who are just trying to provide for their families and make sure they have access to the best health care possible. And so I think we've got to remain focused on policy. Good politics will follow good policy, and that's where we've got to be.
Karl, why are you so, I guess, politically, as you're strategizing and looking at this, and you said you wanted it to go away, and you said they could probably get 51 votes because I guess they used the reconciliation process to pass it in the first place, so it could be used in reverse, is what I'm assuming you're saying there. Why are you so...
It could be, yes.
Why are you so certain, though, that in spite of polling data, that most Americans hate this law, it's a train wreck that Max Baucus calls it, and that so many Americans, even big labor, is now have written a letter to the president, et cetera, against Obamacare? Why are you so certain the Democrats are willing to take it that far, even with the president delaying the employer mandate?
Well, first of all, let's be careful about those union guys. I wrote about the union letter, and I thought it was a significant break with the administration. But remember what their goal is. They want union plans, self-funded plans, company plans done with unions, in association with unions, to get the same generous subsidies that the Affordable Care Act provides to the exchanges. Their goal is not to do away with the Affordable Care Act. Their goal is to take the part of the Affordable Care Act that hurts them, the absence of the exchange of the subsidies in the exchanges. They want to get their hands on that money too.
So the president's likely to give it to them over time.
Yeah. So the second thing is, though, is that, look, I'm for any strategy that has a good chance of working. But again, I don't see where there are 51 votes in the Senate who are going to vote for a measure that does not fund Obamacare. Give me the names of 6 senators, Democratic senators, who are going to say, oh, yeah, the government is shut down. The president is blaming the Republicans. The press is blaming the Republicans. It was the Republicans who said we're willing to have the government shut down over this. I'm going to therefore go vote with the Republicans on it. There aren't any.
Why are you so certain why are you so certain, for example, if the Republicans fund every other aspect of government but Obamacare, you don't think that they can bypass the media, go out there, explain it to people, and this law being as unpopular as it is, that they wouldn't garner significant support and the blame would go on the Democrats?
No, look, if the polls tended to show that there were a significant majority of Americans who not only disapproved of Obamacare, but also approved of the strategy of cutting off the funding, that would be a useful point. But they don't show that. What they show is a majority of opposition to the Affordable Care Act and a minority of support for cutting off funding. And again, we can sit here and say, oh, yeah, all we got to do is tell the truth to the American people. But we've seen this before. The White House has a huge bully pulpit. The president wants the Republicans to do this strategy. It's like he's approaching this the same way he did but when he kept refusing to give out his Hawaii birth certificate. He wanted us to make the argument because he knew at the end of the day this was a winner for him. Who was going to be able to look the American people straight in the eye and say it wasn't our idea to shut down the government, it was the Democrats' idea? No. It was the Republican idea. That's what we've said. We're willing to shut down the government in order to defund Obamacare.
Well, let me ask Senator Lee, do you buy that analysis or no?
No. First of all, I've never said I want a government shutdown. I've said repeatedly I don't want a government shutdown. We don't need one. This ought not be part of that strategy. What I'm saying is let's fund everything else in government, but not Obamacare. We shouldn't be forced to fund Obamacare just to keep everything else going as well. Now, I also want to point out that senators are very self-preserving. What they will and will not vote to do between now and September 30th has yet to be determined. The more they hear from the American people, from Democrats and from Republicans across this country, who are calling in concerned and saying, don't fund this law, the more likely they're going to be to join us. And so, look, the only way to guarantee that this won't work is for us, particularly for Republicans, to forecast in advance that there's no way it can happen. But regardless of whether that's said, the American people don't want this law. They don't like it. They expect those who are against Obamacare to stand firmly against it and to refuse to fund it.
What about that, Karl? What about what Senator Lee is saying, that good policy is good politics in the end?
Look, I agree with him. I think that's why these polls show that the American people, while they disapprove of Obamacare, don't like the idea of cutting off funding for the government. They don't think it's good policy not to pay our military. They don't think it's good policy to say, you know what, you're defending our borders. We can't send you a paycheck this week. You're going to have to wait. And they don't like this. They didn't like it in 1995. They didn't like it when it was being discussed in 2011. And again, it's fine to say that we don't know who's going to vote it or not. But it would seem to me that two things. One is that if you were going to talk about this proposal, that it would have been useful to gain support from a united Republican caucus by patiently working it behind the scenes, explaining it, gaming it, gaining support, instead of just tossing it out there. And the second thing is it strikes me that we would at least be able to say, oh, we think we've got some potential targets. We've got some Democrats who have given us a signal in their comments that they're so concerned about this that they might be willing to support defunding it. And there's not a single Democrat in the United States Senate who's made any kind of comment whatsoever. Now, maybe Senator Lee's got some ideas about who he thinks we can get, and it might be useful to let your audience know who they are so that people in their states can work those Democrats over. But I can't come up with one.
Senator?
We've got to convince the Republicans first. Look, why would they jump over when we've still got a lot of Republicans refusing to join the effort? Karl, the military will be paid. One way or another, government is going to get funded. It's just a question of whether it's funded with Obamacare or without Obamacare. I want two votes. We should have more than this, but I want two votes. One to fund government and one to fund everything else related to Obamacare. The American people deserve to have those separately considered.
Karl, why
if that happens,
go ahead.
If that happens, then the government will be funded, and Obamacare will not be defunded because there'll be 100 votes to fund the government, and there'll be 44 at best 45 votes to defund Obamacare. And look, it's easy to glance over it and say, oh, the military will get paid, but I'm looking at the memorandum from the Deputy Secretary of Defense in April 7th of 2011 that outlines what has to happen in a situation like this, and it says military personnel will serve without pay until such time as Congress makes appropriated funds available to compensate them for this period of service. We're going to be in a place where this is not going to be just simply, oh, don't worry, they're going to get paid. We're going to have real families the first week of October in military communities not able to go to the grocery store, not able to make ends meet because they're living paycheck to paycheck.
Why, if the Republicans pass the funding for the entire rest of the government, except for Obamacare, and the Democrats refuse to fund those parts of the government, why do you assume that the Republicans get all the blame for it?
Because the Democrats won't be refusing to fund all those. They'll amend that measure in the Senate to fund all of government, including the provisions on discretionary spending for Obamacare.
But Mike Lee is saying that you're going to, Senator, jump in if I'm wrong. I'm hearing you say you will fund the entire government, but Obamacare, and that it will be given to the senators, and if they choose to you're saying they will make the choice. Am I wrong?
That's exactly right. That is what we're saying. We're saying the House should pass something saying we fund everything else in government, but this does not include Obamacare funding, and we're stopping all discretionary spending with this bill. We then have another vote where they could try to insert Obamacare funding, and that's not going to pass. And so, look, the point is, the Democrats don't have the political will, nor do the people support them in that. In shutting down government so that we can't pay the salaries of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. This is the kind of divisive politics that the American people have long rejected. The Democrats are not going to get away with this. And I do have to respond to another point that Karl made a minute ago, that we've seen this movie before, and we know how it ends. Well, we haven't. We have never had another situation like this one. We've never had a new entitlement program that is likely to become the mother of all entitlement programs, that is wildly unpopular, and we have a chance to stop it, to defund it before it kicks in. This is the moment for us to stand with the American people, regardless of what the pollsters might be telling us at the moment, because this is good policy, and good policy will bring good politics.
Karl?
I agree with the senator that we've never seen anything like this before. In every other previous shutdown of the government, there has been funding for the vast majority of the government already in place through the regular appropriations process. This will be the first time that I'm aware of in which the entire government is shut down with no discretionary spending bills having been passed and put in place to do things like pay the military. And again, I repeat, it's easy to say that we conservatives are in favor of funding the government and liberals are not, but liberals will easily turn that back on us by saying, you sent us a bill without funding for Obamacare, we sent it back to you with funding for Obamacare, the onus is in your court, the ball is in your court, the responsibility is yours. And you and I both know the media and the president will make that argument.
And Karl, let me ask you this. How then do you get rid of Obamacare? In other words, if this stand isn't taken, how do you foresee getting rid of it?
First, the president gave us an opening, which I cannot believe we have not exploited in both the House and the Senate, and that is he delayed the employer mandate for a year. Now, we ought to be jumping on that, saying, Mr. President, you were willing to help out corporate America, but you're not willing to help out individual Americans. So if you're going to delay the corporate mandate, the business mandate, the employer mandate, we insist that you delay the rest of the bill, namely the individual mandate for a year, and have a robust discussion about whether he had the authority to suspend unilaterally a part of that law on his own hook or not, and whether it's fair to suspend it for businesses but not for the individual. Second, I think we need to go to court. I think we need to be at the courthouse filing a lawsuit. I'm not the lawyer. Senator Lee is. Father was a particularly accomplished lawyer. I don't know what the right time is, but we ought to be at the courthouse challenging the president's ability to disregard the rule of law. Third, we ought to be using our oversight of powers, not only in the House where we have the majority of the committee members and a majority on the committees, but also in the Senate where we have articulate opponents of Obamacare to conduct whatever kind of oversight we can. And finally, we need to be out there presenting an alternative to the American people. If we talk about what we're for as well as what we're against, and we push measures through the House and Senate that are what we are for as opposed to just what we're against, it will, ironically enough, further undermine support for the Affordable Care Act for Obamacare. People will say, wait a minute, we've got a better alternative over here.
All right, let me get a quick response because of the pressures of time here. Senator, I'll give you the final word here. Go ahead.
Okay, look, the bottom line is that
what about Karl's ideas?
I think is not in a good position to be able to say we're going to shut down government. We're going to refuse to fund the government for the purposes of funding the salaries of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, and other essential government programs just because you won't fund Obamacare. They're not in a good position to fight that. And for us to suggest that we ought not even put that on the table is defeatism. Defeatism has not worked well for the American people, and we need to reject it. We need to fight, and we need to stop this no matter what. Those who purport to be against Obamacare must commit that they will not fund it. If you fund this thing, you own it.
All right, Karl, we'll give you another 20 seconds. Go.
Look, first of all, the law has already been on the books for 4 years. Republicans in the Senate and the House have voted for federal budgets that have included funding in it. They are no more complicit for this law by doing so today than when they voted against it in 2010. Second of all, this is a battle that has to be won patiently. It will only ultimately be won when we have a Republican president who will sign the repeal of Obamacare. Anybody who thinks that President Obama is going to sign a bill that either doesn't fund Obamacare or repeals Obamacare is kidding themselves. So we have a long fight ahead of ourselves, and the important thing is to stay together in that fight, not to cast aspersions on each other's values in that fight, to keep looking for opportunities to advance the cause, and to stay in this fight because the future of our country is at stake.
All right, thank you both. Very fascinating debate. Senator Mike Lee, Utah, who is himself the author of Why John Roberts Was Wrong About Health Care. Karl Rove, the architect, author of Courage and Consequence. Thank you both, guys, for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Sean.
The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.